7 proofs that Africans existed before the Bible's Adam. They say the first man was Adam. But what if the story of Adam is only a chapter, not the beginning? Long before the Bible was written, before Hebrew scrolls or Mesopotamian tales, Africa was already alive. People farmed, built, worshipped, and ruled, thousands of years before the first biblical story ever took form. Archaeologists have uncovered bones, tools, and civilizations that stretch so far back in time that the so-called Garden of Eden begins to look like a much later echo of what Africa already lived. So before you rush to believe that humanity began in the Middle East, stay with us, because in this video, we bring you 7 undeniable proofs that Africans existed long before the Bible's Adam. By the time we reach the last proof, you'll understand why the oldest stories of Earth begin where the sun rises first, in Africa. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Afri Facts, where we tell Africa's real story. Now, we begin with proof number 1. The oldest human fossils were found in Africa. They say Adam was the first man, but when scientists went digging for humanity's earliest footprints, they didn't find him in the Middle East. They found Africa. In 1974, in the Afar region of Ethiopia, a team of archaeologists uncovered something that would rewrite human history: the remains of a woman who walked the earth 3.2 million years ago. They called her Lucy. Lucy wasn't a myth or a legend. She was real. Her bones show she walked upright long before the world ever heard the name Adam. Her discovery proved something that shook the scientific and religious world, that humanity's story began in Africa, millions of years before any biblical timeline. But Lucy was not alone. Further south, in Kenya and Tanzania, even older fossils were found, like Australopithecus afarensis and Paranthropus boisei, ancestors who lived, hunted, and raised families when most of the world was still silent wilderness. Then came Omo Kibish, also in Ethiopia, fossils of Homo sapiens dated to around 195,000 years ago. These were modern humans, people like you and me. They made tools, used fire, and probably told stories under the African moon. Compare that to the biblical Adam, said to have lived about 6,000 years ago. That means by the time Adam appeared in the Hebrew story, Africans had already been walking the earth for over 180,000 years. It's not blasphemy, it's evidence. And that evidence is written not in ink, but in bones, soil, and time. So if the oldest human fossils are African, who really were the first people on Earth? And how did their story become rewritten into a new narrative called Adam? Next, we move to proof number 2, ancient African civilizations that existed before the Bible was written. Ancient African civilizations that existed before the Bible was written. Before the Bible was ever written, before Genesis spoke of Eden, Cain, and Abel, there were kingdoms in Africa so advanced, their knowledge still puzzles the world today. Let's begin with ancient Egypt, or Kemet as its original people called it. Historians agree, Kemet's civilization began around 3100 BCE, more than 1,000 years before the earliest Hebrew scriptures were even composed. These Africans were already building massive pyramids that aligned perfectly with the stars. They practiced medicine, performed complex surgeries, studied astronomy, and understood the movement of the sun long before the Western world caught up. They had writing, hieroglyphs, when the Bible's authors had not yet been born. They had laws, schools, and libraries when the rest of the world still wandered in tribes. But Egypt wasn't alone. Across the continent, powerful civilizations rose and thrived, like Nubia and Kush, rich in gold, iron, and culture. The Nubians built pyramids of their own, smaller but more numerous than Egypt's, and ruled as pharaohs of the 25th dynasty, long before the world even knew of biblical kings. And far west, along the Niger River, ancient communities like Nok in modern-day Nigeria were already mastering iron smelting and creating lifelike terracotta sculptures. As early as 1500 BCE, long before any story of Adam and Eve could be inked on parchment. These were not primitive tribes. They were engineers, astronomers, doctors, and builders, Africans who charted time, measured the heavens, and built monuments that still stand after 5,000 years. So if Adam was the first man, why do we find entire African civilizations, cities, languages, and governments that flourished thousands of years before the Bible's first word? Maybe the question isn't, did Africans exist before Adam, but rather, did Adam's story borrow from the memory of ancient Africa? Next, we travel deeper into proof number 3, ancient African DNA, the oldest lineages on Earth. African DNA, the oldest lineages on Earth. Diverse in features yet connected in ancestry. Every human on Earth carries a story, not in words, but in DNA. It's our oldest record, one that can't be erased, rewritten, or translated wrongly. And when scientists trace the human family tree through our genetic code, every branch led back to one root, Africa. In 1987, researchers studying human mitochondria, the part of our cells passed from mother to child, made a stunning discovery. All living humans shared a common maternal ancestor who lived in Africa roughly 150,000 to 200,000 years ago. They called her mitochondrial Eve. But don't confuse her with the biblical Eve. This was not one woman alone in a garden. She was part of a thriving community of early Africans, one whose descendants spread across the entire planet. Her story is written not in scripture, but in the blood of every human alive today. Further studies on the Y chromosome, the male genetic line, confirm the same truth. The oldest Y DNA lineage, known as haplogroup A00, is found almost exclusively among African men, particularly in West and Central Africa, and is estimated to be over 250,000 years old. That means the oldest genetic signatures of humanity are still carried by Africans today. No other continent holds such deep ancestry, not Europe, not Asia, not the Middle East. When we say all humans came from Africa, it's not poetry, it's science. The migrations that shaped the world, from Asia to the Americas, began with Africans walking out of the mother continent between 60,000 and 70,000 years ago. So when someone asks where the first humans came from, the answer is not hidden in ancient scrolls or temples. It's hidden within us, in our very DNA, and it all points home to Africa. If the world's bloodline begins in Africa, then how did the biblical story replace this truth with a Middle Eastern origin? To answer that, we need to look at the evidence buried in Africa's own spiritual memory. Next up, proof number 4, Africa's ancient spiritual systems before the Bible. Long before the Bible brought the story of Adam, Eve, and Eden, Africans already knew the Creator. They already spoke with the divine, honored ancestors, and lived by sacred laws rooted not in written scripture, but in nature itself. Across the continent, from the Nile to the Niger, spiritual systems flourished for thousands of years, each revealing how deeply Africa understood the unseen world. In Kemet, ancient Egypt, people worshiped the divine order called Ma'at, truth, balance, and cosmic justice. They believed the universe was sustained by moral harmony long before sin and salvation were ever written in Hebrew. Their temples told stories of resurrection, divine birth, and judgment, ideas that later appeared reworded in biblical texts. Further west, among the Yoruba people, the creator was known as Olodumare, the source of all life. Through the Orishas, divine forces of nature, humans connected with the spiritual realm. These teachings spoke of destiny, Ori, morality, and divine purpose, all concepts that existed long before the arrival of any missionary or holy book. In Akan spirituality, God was called Nyame, the unseen creator who gave humans both physical and spiritual essence. Among the Zulu, it was Unkulunkulu, the great ancestor who formed life from the reeds. Among the Dogon of Mali, ancient priests mapped the stars and described the invisible Sirius B star, centuries before telescopes were even invented. These weren't pagan or primitive beliefs. They were systems of order, astronomy, medicine, and morality. They guided millions, and they existed thousands of years before Moses ever wrote Genesis. So ask yourself, when ancient Africans already had gods, laws, temples, and creation stories, how could Adam possibly have been the first man to know God? The truth is simple. Africans didn't need a foreign book to tell them about creation. They already walked with the Creator, in their own languages, on their own soil, under the African sun. And just like their spirituality, their mastery of time and the cosmos was unmatched. Next, we uncover proof number 5, Africa's ancient science and knowledge of the universe. Before telescopes, before Galileo, before the so-called age of science, Africans had already mapped the heavens. They studied the stars, the planets, the cycles of the sun and moon, and built calendars so precise they rival modern ones today. Let's begin in the desert of Nabta Playa, southern Egypt. Here, buried beneath the sands, archaeologists discovered a 7,000-year-old stone circle, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids. Each stone was aligned with the rising of the sun during the summer solstice. That means Africans were charting solar patterns 2,000 years before the Bible was written. In the same Nile Valley, the Temple of Dendera holds carvings of constellations and zodiac signs, proof that ancient Egyptians observed the movement of stars with scientific precision. They knew of planetary orbits, solar years, and even the tilt of the Earth's axis. But the mystery deepens with the Dogon people of Mali. For centuries, Dogon priests described a hidden star called Potolo, what modern science now calls Sirius B, an invisible companion to the bright star Sirius, unseen without modern telescopes. How did they know? Their oral teachings described its elliptical orbit and 50-year rotation period, facts confirmed by astronomers only in the 20th century. From the Dogon to the Yoruba, who used advanced calendars based on lunar and solar cycles, to the Ethiopian calendar, still 7 years ahead of the Gregorian one. Africans mastered timekeeping when most of the world had none. Their science wasn't separated from spirituality, it was united with it. They believed studying the stars was a way to understand the Creator's design, a sacred duty to align human life with cosmic order. So while the world was still learning to tell night from day, Africans had already measured time, space, and the movement of the heavens. By the time the writers of Genesis looked up and said, "Let there be light," Africans had already been studying that light for millennia. If Africa gave birth to the science of time and space, it's no surprise that it also gave birth to the first humans to walk the earth. But there's more, much more. Next, we reveal proof number 6, ancient African artifacts and writings older than the Bible. Ancient African artifacts and writings older than the Bible. If history is a book, then Africa holds its first pages, written not on paper, but in stone, metal, and clay, because before the Bible, before Moses or Abraham, Africans were already documenting life, law, and language. Let's start again with Kemet, ancient Egypt, home of the pyramid texts, the world's oldest known religious writings, carved into tomb walls over 4,000 years ago. These texts spoke of resurrection, divine judgment, and the journey of the soul, themes that appear later, almost word for word, in the Hebrew Bible. Even older still, on the icon monoliths of Nigeria, massive stones stand etched with mysterious symbols, a script so ancient that some scholars believe it predates known writing systems by thousands of years. To this day, they remain undeciphered, a silent code from Africa's forgotten past. And then there's Knot culture, central Nigeria, whose terracotta sculptures, dating as far back as 1500 BCE, show not only artistic genius, but a highly organized society. These were centuries before Israel even became a kingdom. Farther south, the Nsibidi script, used among the Ekbe and Igbo peoples, was a complex system of symbols representing love, law, war, and spirituality. Long before Europeans introduced alphabets, Africans were already communicating in written symbols of their own. And in Ethiopia, the Ge'ez script, still used in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church today, dates back nearly 3,000 years, making it one of the world's oldest written languages still in use. Ge'ez existed before Latin, before Greek, before the Hebrew Old Testament. Each artifact, each carving, each symbol tells the same story. Africa was not waiting for civilization to arrive. Africa was civilization. So when we see biblical tales of writing on stone tablets, remember, Africans had been writing on stone walls, clay tablets, and temple pillars long before. These artifacts don't just prove existence, they prove memory. The memory of a people who lived, created, and recorded life before the Bible ever existed. And if Africans wrote their story before the Bible, then it's no wonder that echoes of Africa appear in the world's oldest myths. Next, we close this journey with the final and most powerful truth. Proof number 7. The timeline of humanity. How Africa predates Adam by hundreds of thousands of years. If time could speak, it would tell us this. The story of humanity did not begin 6,000 years ago in a garden called Eden. It began hundreds of thousands of years earlier on the red soils and savannas of Africa. According to the biblical timeline, Adam, the first man, was created around 4000 BCE. But archaeology, genetics, and anthropology all point to a far older beginning. The oldest Homo sapiens fossils, found at Omo Kibish in Ethiopia, are about 195,000 years old. Another discovery in Jebel Irhoud, Morocco, revealed human remains dated to over 300,000 years ago. That means humans, real humans, walked the earth nearly 300,000 years before Adam was ever imagined. And while Adam's story describes a small family in a mythical garden, Africa had already seen migrations, families, trade, art, and burial rituals for tens of thousands of generations. By the time Hebrew scribes were recording their scriptures around 1000 BCE, Africans had already built pyramids that aligned with the stars, mapped the solar year, practiced medicine, and worshiped one creator under countless native names. So when the Bible speaks of the beginning, what it really marks is the beginning of one culture's written story, not the beginning of humanity itself. Humanity's real beginning, the first dawn of consciousness, art, and spirit, is African. We are the living descendants of that first dawn. Every breath, every heartbeat carries the memory of that soil. When you touch the earth of Africa, you're not just touching land, you're touching time itself. So the next time someone says humanity began with Adam, tell them about Lucy, about Omo Kibish, about Kemet and Cush, about the Dogon and the Yoruba. Tell them that before Adam had a name, Africa already had a history. This is Afri Facts, where we tell the stories the world tried to erase. Like, share, and subscribe, because Africa's truth is the world's beginning.